Maybe. How do you do, neighbor? It's Berean Spirits time once again. The boys have gathered around, and they're ready for you. So join in, make comments, and study with the guys as they try to study as the Bereans did in Acts chapter 17. And now, here's the guys.
Good morning and welcome back to Berean Spirits for the first episode of 2026. Can we get it? I don't have my thing near me, so I can't do the applause.
Woo!
Woo! It's been a minute since we've been in here, but it's good to be back with Richard and well, with Chris and yeah, I guess Richard too. Yeah. It's good to be here. Good to be back, and we have I hope a good show planned for us this morning, as we are looking forward to 2026 and how we can improve ourselves. Before we jump into that, though, I am Josh Thornhill with the West Side Church of Christ here in Wichita, Kansas. Grateful and blessed to be here, and we're having a lovely fall this winter. And with me, as usual,
Did you say a lovely fall this winter?
Yes, we're having a lovely
This
fall
winter,
this winter. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's not very wintry.
No, it's not.
It's kind of warm, unseasonably warm. I remember this time last year, I had flown back to Washington, and it had hit, I think, negative temperatures, and there was a big snowstorm that hit, and it was well into the week before it got above freezing. So quite the contrast this week. So anyway, and to my, I guess on the screen, it'd be my right is Chris Peltz, the evangelist for the South Side Church of Christ in Springfield, Missouri. How you doing, Chris?
Doing good, man. Looking forward to the program.
Good. And down below me doesn't mean that we're looking down on him, even though we are. No, not
it's
really.
Like the Brady Bunch.
And just below me is Richard with the Kearney Church of Christ in Kearney, Missouri. How you doing, Richard?
I'm great. I'm just hunky-dory. What else do you want me to say?
As little as possible. So, yeah.
I went to see you.
Yeah, you did.
Yes, I did. On our little break, I went down and saw you and heard you teach class. You did a really good job.
He was snoring the whole way through. So.
Oh, that's not true. That's not true. But yeah, that was, if everybody gets a chance and you're in Wichita, invite everybody to go and visit with the church there and listen to Josh teach class. It was a Wednesday night. It was a really good class.
I've just got to tell this. It was funny. No. So I had an outline that I had handed out for the class, and we're going through the lesson, and I'm just going through teaching through the outline, and then Richard pops up with this point.
And it was a good one. It was really good.
It was a good one.
Yeah.
But it was the very next point that I was about to state.
Verbatim.
Exactly.
I mean, it was like I read it off the sheet, which I probably did. It goes to show you how people think. I probably went through there and saw it, and then somehow it became my idea, and I decided to say it right before he was ready to make that point. So,
well, at least it seemed to validate the point that I was making. So
it validated. It validated. I look like a fool. Is what it validated. It's like,
well, that's
some guy just making the next point, and he's reading it off the outline. Like, wow, he's really impressive.
Or anyway. In other words, hurry up, Josh. Get to the next point.
Yeah, he was ready.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Well. We've got a good show planned, I think. for us this
have you
year.
figured out what it is yet?
Well, I'm just reading up the thing at the very top.
Oh, okay.
So it says, I am resolved in 2026 to follow Jesus. So that's what we're talking about today. It is 2026, and we usually people usually make some resolutions of things they want to do better, do differently, improve themselves in some way, one way or another. And that's all well and good. It's perfectly fine to make resolutions, but I always suggest that the best resolutions that we can make are spiritual in nature. Not that you have to wait until the new year in order to do this, but it's a good opportunity to reflect, because it is a beginning. There's an end and a beginning of a year and entering into a new year. And so it's always a good time to reflect and to think about what it is that we want to do moving forward, and areas that we can improve. And so we're going to talk about ways we can resolve to follow Jesus and to grow in that area in 2026. So who would like to start it out for us?
Well, I would just like to say resolutions are great, but it should start. All resolutions should start with our spiritual resolutions. For instance, I thought it'd be great this year if I outfished you guys. But in order to do that, I need to become more spiritual. No, that's a joke. Sorry.
Well, 3rd John starts off by saying, may you prosper as your soul prospers.
Yeah.
So there you go. But
so that's why he's not a good fisherman.
The unfortunate thing about resolutions altogether is too often here coming up in just a couple of weeks, there's this, and I don't remember exactly what they call it, but there's the week where everybody pretty much bails on their resolution. And that seems to be a pretty regular thing, especially with all the physical resolutions. But while we can start with spiritual resolutions, we've got to make sure that we are ready to maintain them and continue through with them, whether it is Bible reading, whether it is the way we talk to someone, whether it is something that we're doing as far as influencing friends and family or neighbors, or talking to someone about the gospel. So many things that we could do, in this new year, as far as not only growing ourselves, but being an influence on others. I think it's very important for us to, have that commitment, and maybe that's the resolution, right? To be committed to this, not just short term.
It's interesting because several years ago, I did a lesson on the song I Am Resolved. And, I was talking about resolutions, and, resolutions are those things that you do for the first 3 weeks of the year before you resume your natural habits. But you think about the word resolution, it's a form of the word, or it's a kind of an expansion of the word resolute. And I think that's related to the word resolve. There's some kind of relation there. And you think about the resolve, as Richard titled the show, I Am Resolved. That word is a determination. There's a determination there. The reason why people's resolutions fail is because resolve is not there, present in them. I think in Daniel chapter 1 and verse 8, where Daniel, when they're in captivity, and he has every excuse to reason, well, we're in Babylon, and, we're captives, and we're just going to have to listen to what the king says. It says in verse 8, he purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. And so, there was a determination within his heart that he wasn't going to allow himself to be defiled. And I think that's the difference between those who are successful spiritually and those who are not, is there's a determination and resolve there to go forward and to keep going forward and to press forward. I think you can see that as well in the book of Hebrews, because these Christians are wavering in their commitment. And the way I like to describe the book of Hebrews is, there's times where you're driving down the interstate, and then there's the lines start to get a lot closer together, because it's indicating that this lane is an exit lane. And if you're in that lane, you're still on the interstate, but if you keep in that lane, you're going to get off. And these Christians in the book of Hebrews, they were in the lane, the exit lane. They hadn't gotten off yet, but they were in the exit lane. And the point that he was trying to make to them is that they needed to deepen their commitment and their resolve to Christ and to follow him more faithfully, so that they could overcome the persecutions that were present or to come. And so I think that's a key to whatever it is that we're going to be talking about tonight. There has to be a resolve, or this morning, excuse me, a resolve, a determination within ourselves to accomplish what it is that we set out to accomplish. Otherwise, it's just wishful thinking. So go ahead.
Well, I agree. I think, you always got to make a determination before you do something. And, Barnabas in Acts 11, when he got to Antioch, he encouraged them all that with purpose of heart, Acts 11:23, they should continue with the Lord. So, I mean, there is you have to set your heart to be able to do something spiritual. You got to make a determination, and you're going to have to want to stick with it. The problem, I think, comes into, how do you go from making this into a habit instead of just, something that's going to die here, and, some determination that's going to find a way to fail in 2 or 3 weeks. That's what you want to do, is to get it established as part of your life. And that's not always easy to do. Just making a determination is the part. That's the first step. But there's more to it in following Jesus. You're going to have to, and I think Jesus was parlaying. I think he was putting that out there when he was walking on the earth. He was trying to convince people about what it's going to take in order to be following him, and counting the cost. In Luke 14. When he talked about some ruler going to war, and not counting, whether or not he can finish the battle or win the battle. He hadn't counted the cost. Those types of things. We need to count the cost, and before we even make the resolution, we need to count the cost and ask ourselves, are we willing to pay that? Because following Jesus, there's a hefty, that's fantastic. I would advise it for everybody, but it's not easy, and there's going to have to be sacrifice made. And so you have to ask yourself, are you willing to sacrifice that? I'd like to lose a little weight, and, I made that New Year's resolution. I was going to try again. And so far so good. I've been shedding some weight, but I do know that in order for me to lose weight, certain foods, can't be eaten, or at least not ready, having it handy. And so, I had to count the cost. Do I really want to lose weight? If I'm going to try this, I'm going to have to make sure certain things are not around me. Well, likewise, if we're going to follow Jesus, we have to count the cost. I think that's first and foremost if we want to be successful with our resolve.
Yeah, and understanding too what that means, because we think about counting the cost, and so often we think about the loss, right? What it's going to take, or what I'm going to have to go without, what I'm going to have to do without. But when that's our focus, it becomes more difficult. While you're right, we have to count the cost. We also have to take into consideration, that end result, the reward that is there for us, and understand just how worth it is. Right? I mean, Paul, when he wrote to the Romans, he talked about how heaven is not even worthy to be compared to the sufferings of this earth. These are just, but for a moment. And so these struggles, these difficulties, but yet what we have eternally, if we are successful, that is, really what will help motivate us to carry through the resolutions that we make.
Yeah, that's a good point, because people who do resolve to lose weight usually have skinny clothes that they keep around and look at, that they want to get into. And so, they see that as their goal, and they keep an eye on that as their goal. And so that's a good point to bring up, is the fact that, yes, we do count the cost, but keeping your eye on, what you can, how you can be benefited, that's something to keep in mind as well.
While Richard was talking, just to pass the time, because, it's anyway, I looked up.
Thought I was killing time for you.
I looked up, how long it takes to establish a habit, and the average is 66 days. But it can vary, it says, from 18 to 254 days. And so there are, some differing amounts of time, but a significant amount of time is devoted to building habits. And so I think that would include the spiritual habits that we're trying to build. But, thinking about the reward, I think that is a valuable key to keeping the progress going. There's a lot of different financial advisors out there, but I know and they have differing ideas of things. But I know particularly Dave Ramsey. I've listened to him quite a bit, and he's talking to people who are trying to get out of debt. And one of the things that he suggests is what he calls the debt snowball, where you start small and you start building progress from there. And so what he tells you to do is to take your debts, smallest to largest, and then you start paying the smallest one off first. And then once that one's paid off, you move to the next smallest one, and then what then is the smallest one, and then you just keep building until you tackle all of them. And the reason why he's suggesting doing it that way is because a lot of people think, I need to start with the biggest one first, and then that takes forever, and then they kind of start petering out. Well, what he says is if you start with the smallest one, you get a quick win, you get a reward there, a progress. You make progress, and you can see that progress, and so you get excited, and it helps push you forward. So reward is important. We need to look to the reward. I think that's part of Hebrews 11, where Abraham was looking to the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. Moses was willing to suffer reproach with the people of God and to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin, for he was looking to the reward. And so that's part of the. I hate to use this illustration because I feel like it diminishes the reality. But that carrot on a stick that you hold in front of the animal to keep it moving. I hate to relate it that way, but I think it does provide a good illustration of. There's something in front of us that we're working toward. There's a reward that we're seeking, and only through that diligence, only through that continued effort, are we going to be able to reach that reward and to accomplish the goals that we truly want to accomplish.
I think Paul talks about that in Philippians chapter 3. In fact, around verse 12. Not that he's already obtained, but that he, not looking back, but striving forward to that upward goal, that call, that prize that lies ahead. In fact, he goes on in the next couple of verses, and he says, "Let those who are mature think this way," and I think that goes to the maturity that we're all striving for when it comes to these resolutions. One of the things that I'd like to kind of throw out there just to for folks to consider, because I think everyone is thinking about Bible readings, whether it's reading the Bible for a year, reading a particular book, learning a book, memorizing passages. There all kinds of things that people resolve when it comes to the word itself. And I want to back up for just a minute on that. And before you jump into, you're right, I'm going to do this, resolve to do this with the word of God, consider the idea of loving the word, right? Loving the truth. Love, we think about that sometimes as just simply an emotion. It is a choice. 1 Corinthians 13 describes what true agape love is, and it is a choice, just as we are to love one another, as God has loved us. That's a choice that we make, and that is, being resolved to make that choice to love the word of God. Because what do you do with the things that you love? What do you do with the people that you love? You talk to them, you spend time with them, you make an effort, right, for that, to learn and to grow and to draw closer to them. And that's ultimately what we're talking about, not only loving God, but loving truth. Because without that love of the truth, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 makes it very clear that that we will fail, right? I mean, we will be lost because we do not have a love of the truth. And so loving the truth, determining and being resolved to love the truth, I think will help us in our approach when we read, because we're not just reading to get through a resolution. We're reading to learn and to grow in that love and understanding of God and His truth.
Yeah, and I think that idea can be evident when you're talking to people and you're presenting truth to them and they still don't want to hear. This is true in religious matters. Why don't people see the truth on baptism or the truth on all, whatever Bible topic you want to put in there? It's because they don't want to. People don't want to know or hear the truth, and so they find reasons to reject it. But if we love the truth, we're going to seek it, and we're going to be able to receive it, or willing to receive it once it does come. And so, very good.
Well, we talked about loving the truth, but we also talked about heaven, thinking about the reward. I was just thinking about, where does fear come in?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times you'll see people when they're trying to, let's say, lose weight, for instance, they fail. And then all of a sudden they have some type of health incident and now they succeed. All of a sudden death becomes very real to them and they become very serious and they suddenly succeed. So, under the same light, where does fear come into play?
I think that's a good motivator. I think it's not the only motivator, and I think there's a problem if it's the only motivator, because that could lead to burnout really quickly. But I do think that is it should be probably a part of it. Recognizing the consequences of your failure to do so. I think where the fear can come in is to help when it comes to making the excuses. You think about Matthew 25 with the parable of the talents, that guy, the 1 talent man, he's making excuses. I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you scattered no seed, and I was afraid and went away and hid your talent in the ground. See, have what is yours. And the master's not, well, okay, you were afraid, and so I understand why you wasted that talent. He says, you wicked and lazy slave, you knew that I reap where I did not sow, gather where I scattered no seed. Therefore, you ought to have put my money in the bank, and on my arrival, I would have received back my money with interest. Therefore, take away the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. That he allowed himself to be immobilized by his fear, and we can debate whether that's just an excuse or if that was the reality. But he can allow himself to be immobilized by his fear, and then he doesn't do anything. I've heard people talk about paralysis by analysis. or something like that, where they just get so caught up in the analysis of it that they don't know where to start. They kind of freeze up, and I don't know how to start. I don't know where to begin. And this guy, he was afraid of his master, he says, and so he buried it in the ground. At the end of the day, that's an excuse, and clearly not a very valid one, because you see the end of him, the result that took place. And so, yes, we ought to have a fear of the consequences, but I would suggest also the fear needs to be that reverence. If fear is going to get us anywhere, it's got to be that reverence for God. Not that we shouldn't have that other kind of fear for God. I think they both go together. But there has to be that fear of God in our hearts if we're going to be able to accomplish what it is that we need to accomplish. Because I think that's the reason why there's so much, as Paul says in Romans 3, why there's all this sin that's a problem, is because there's no fear of God before their eyes. And so I think both of those do play a part in us being as determined or moving forward in the way that we ought to move forward.
Work out your own salvation with fear and trembling.
Mm-hmm.
Philippians 2. So, yeah, I think fear's got to have a part of it.
Yep.
And that's comes probably into the decision to decide to follow Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
You got your reward, but you got the fear also. I mean, it's either one or the other. I mean, what do you want to, how do you want to live your life? Do you want to live your life expecting to go to heaven, or do you want to live your life expecting to go to hell? I mean, that's really your only two choices. And so then, if you decide I want to live my life expecting to go to heaven, then, then you make the resolve, right? That's when you say, okay, let's get it done. Would that be right?
Mm-hmm.
I think so.
And that's the tactic that the Hebrew author uses, because in chapter 3, he encourages them to, encourage one another daily, lest anyone is hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. And then he goes on throughout the rest of the chapter to describe the wilderness generation and the fact that they did not enter in to the promised land because of their unbelief. And he tells them, you're treading down the same path that will lead you to the very same end. You are displaying the same unbelief that this wilderness generation displayed. And you know what happened to them, and it's going to happen to you too. And then later on in chapter 10, he says, if we sin willfully after receiving the knowledge of truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sin. And if, the consequences were great under the law of Moses, how much more will the consequences be to reject the law of Christ? And he says in verse 31, I believe, it's a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And so he does use that tactic. You need to be wary of the consequences of your actions here. And, boy, wouldn't our society be a lot better if people would think about that more often.
Peter does similar things in his writings. 2 Peter chapter 3, for example, after going through and refuting the idea that, since Christ hasn't come by now, he's not going to, and the power of the word, and, in the fact that the day of the Lord will come in verse 10, he goes on in verse 11 to say, knowing all of this, what manner of life ought you to live? And I think that's part of that motivation, knowing what's coming, knowing, what the end could be, as Richard pointed out, whether it is, heaven or hell, and what your expectation might be. But regardless, knowing this life is not eternal, there is something else that is eternal. What's that going to motivate you to do? What manner of life ought you to live? And, and he goes on in verse 18, to grow in grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Christ Jesus. So all of those things I think are important and valuable to motivate us, whether it's love, whether it's fear. But the point is, I think ultimately that we're striving to be on the narrow path, right? I mean, that's the ultimate goal. That's what it is to follow Jesus, to be truly converted and to submit ourselves to Him wholly, and live our lives for Him.
Well, we're learning. What we're setting out to do is to be like Jesus. We're setting out to be like the Son of God. And, that's no small endeavor, So I would think then that, if you're going to take on, and it's a very noble quest. It's the most noble quest that anybody can do is to be like Jesus. If that's what you're going to do, if that's your decision, then wouldn't it help to have a game plan, to have some type of plan on how can I be successful in being able to accomplish this? I would think there would be.
Absolutely. Because if you aim for nothing, you'll hit it every time.
Yeah, well.
That one's for free. There you go.
I was thinking about my casting. I guess, the way Ryan got tangled up the last time we fished, we should be thinking about him.
Yeah, poor guy. He spent the whole day untangling that line.
He aimed for everything but the water.
So real quick, you talk about casting, Richard. You were a golfer. You're into sports and baseball. What is one of the most important things about to have or to do when you're swinging a club or a bat or even casting a fishing line? What's one of the biggest things that you would tell somebody?
Well, you keep your eye on the ball.
Okay, and then what? But I mean, as you swing, what do you do?
Well, you make contact.
And then that's it? You just stop?
Well, you swing through the ball.
You follow through.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing right there. Because when you don't follow through, that's where things get wonky, right? Things go sideways. You've got to have that follow through, and there's in every aspect of life there is that follow through that we talk about, and spiritually it's no different. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, the Hebrew writer in Hebrews chapter 12 at the very, very beginning talks about running to win, right? When you're running, we've got this cloud of witnesses from chapter 11 that are cheering us on. We're running to win, and we set our eyes on that goal of winning that race, and we run to win the race. And that means we've got to follow through and make sure that we don't quit, we don't give up, that Christ is where our focus lies. Just like Peter walking on water in Matthew chapter 14. When he began to sink, it was because he wasn't focused on Jesus anymore. And so, following through and keeping our eyes on Christ is going to help us to make sure that our habits are developed and we're living our life according to His will.
One of the things I was thinking about with this is making sure that you got support. Instead of just trying to do this by yourself, which you'll more than likely fail, you will fail. You got the chance to, first of all, Jesus said, I'm going to be with you. I mean, that's about the best support anybody could even come up with, I would say. But that's not all that the Lord has provided for us. And, he's, once you've been baptized into Christ, He adds you to the church. And that's people who are like-minded. Those are people who are like you, who hopefully are, made that same resolve that they are going to be like Jesus. And so, making sure that you have support, and that means, you gotta communicate with God. You gotta listen to what He says in the Bible, and you gotta pray to Him. But you also need to go to your brethren, because a lot of times the Lord will answer your prayers with a brother. That brother's there to encourage you. And I know we say this a lot, but Hebrews 10:24 and 25, it says, let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Hebrews 10, 24, 25. So, getting to church is a big part of making sure you don't fail in this endeavor. And a lot of times when people fail, it's because they just stop coming to church. And that's a big sign your resolution, your resolve to follow Jesus is and it's hitting the skids. It's not going to work.
Yeah, and we can come back to that Hebrews then. The author is writing to these Christians because they're departing. They maybe have not fully departed yet, but they're departing from Christ. And there's really two things that he uses to focus on to help them as they go throughout, as he goes throughout this letter. One of them is what you just mentioned, leaning on your brethren. He talks about in chapter 3, we mentioned a minute ago, that, encourage one another daily while it is called today, lest you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. Chapter 10, 24 and 25, encouraging one another, stirring one another up to love and good works, not forsaking the assembling. In chapter 12, I believe he talks about strengthening the feeble knees. It's an emphasis upon one another. You need your brethren. There's this support group that God has given in order to enable you or empower you to be able to press forward. And then the second one, and perhaps the most important, not perhaps, it is the most important, kind of focusing on what our show title is you need to fix your eyes on Jesus. That's kind of the culmination there in chapter 12 and verse 2 rather, fixing our eyes upon Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. He's spent 10.5 or 9.5 chapters emphasizing who Jesus is. He's the better messenger. He's the better apostle. He's the better priest. He's the better sacrifice. He's better in every way. He provides the better rest. He inaugurated the better covenant. Everything about him is better. And I heard someone say, if you just knew who Jesus was, you'd never cast off your faith in him. And that's really what he's trying to do, is fix your eyes on Jesus, and you'll never go astray when you're doing that. I heard an illustration of this man. It was snowing out one day, and there's these 3 boys playing outside. And this man challenged the 3 boys to a race. And it wasn't a race where, the first one to cross the finish line won. It was the one who ran the straightest line won. And so one of the boys ran, and he was looking straight down at his feet, trying to make sure he kept straight on his path. The next boy, he looked behind him. He kept turning back and looking at his path to see how straight it was. And the last one, and coincidentally the one who the one who won, he fixed his eye on the end and he ran straight there. And that's that's what we're trying to encourage us in today, fixing our eyes upon Jesus, fixing our eyes on the goal, and running straight there, and not allowing ourselves to be blinded or distracted by the things that are around us. And so that's really what we all can seek to resolve to do and improve ourselves in the coming year. But don't neglect God's people, because that's going to help you stay the course as you keep going on.
Amen.
There's and Chris alluded to this, but I want to share a little thing that I visualize sometimes, and that's in Hebrews chapter 11. So this would be like a third point to what Josh is saying, but it is and it isn't. But in Hebrews chapter 11, you have all these examples of faith, and then in Hebrews 12, it starts off with, since we have this great cloud of witnesses. And those are all those people, back in Hebrews 11. And so whenever I'm in a time when I need to be courageous, I try to visualize God saying, you can do this. And then it's like an arena, and I'm in an arena, And everybody in the stands are these people in Hebrews 11 that are cheering, saying, you can do this. And, I think sometimes when you visualize this, it can help you find the courage, that's needed in times of great stress, because there's going to be, like Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, there's going to be persecution. You got to be ready to pay that cost.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, having the support from the scriptures, having the love of the truth, having the support of Jesus, having the support of your brethren, you got to have that, and you got to know, to access that. And if you take it for granted and you think I got this without leaning on that support, you will fail. You will fail. That's why the Lord put it there.
It's almost like he knows what he's talking about.
He's the author and finisher of our faith, right? So I think he knows what he's talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Chris, any last thoughts?
You've alluded to several times, but Hebrews chapter 10, towards the end, he talked about the blood of Christ in verses 26 through 29. And, remembering, not trampling it underfoot. There is no other sacrifice. There is no other Savior, no other Messiah that is coming. And he goes on through verse 38 and 39, talking about not casting off the confidence. And in chapter 12, strengthening the feeble knees and hands that hang down. You can grow weary in well-doing in a hurry. Kind of that slow and steady wins the race. But as we've been saying, keeping your eyes focused on Christ, that right there will get you through.
Absolutely. Richard, any last thoughts?
Yeah. Make sure you don't leave temptation in front of you when you're going through this. And I base that on Ephesians 4:26, when he was talking about being angry and don't let the sun go down on your wrath. But he ends that, and a lot of people don't even give emphasis to this verse, but it's so important. In verse 27, he says, nor give place to the devil. And that simply means don't give him an opportunity. If I want to lose weight, one thing I know I can't do is I can't leave chips around the house, because I love chips, and those things are just dead calories. I mean, they're packed full of them, and I can't leave them there, or I can't lose weight. And well, the same thing, carnal living, we can't leave temptation around us. And we can do that. We can have carnal thrown in our face so often through the internet, through social media, through the television shows and whatnot, the music we listen to. Don't give place to the devil. Don't leave these things lying around, because again, more than likely you're going to fail.
Mm-hmm. We've kind of talked about the resolutions here, and there's things that resolutions, like some of the things that people typically resolve to do. That's not a matter of life and death. I mean, I guess for some the weight loss thing can be a matter of what life and death, but if I want to do this more or that more, or
smoking,
less,
drinking, yeah, there's other things, smoking, drinking.
Well, some of them are, but some of the things that people want to do, maybe it's be more organized, or do this more, or this less, or whatever. Some of those aren't necessarily a thing of life or death, but resolving to follow Jesus, that is a matter of life and death. And so I'd encourage all of us to reflect on how well we have followed Jesus. There's always room for improvement, and so to continue to resolve each day to follow Jesus more and more, so that we can enjoy the eternal reward, and we can dwell in his presence forevermore. And so there's nothing of greater value than that, no greater concern that you can concern yourself with. And so I hope that's been a good study for you and encouragement. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to us. I believe it's bereanspirits@gmail.com is the email. So feel free to send us an email or write a question or whatever. We'd be happy to answer that for you. And so we'll look forward to being back next week as we study the Bible once again. But in the meantime, keep searching the scriptures with Berean spirits.
Well, folks, that's all for today. Don't worry. Lord willing, the guys will be back next week for another Bible study on Berean spirits. Until then, let the guys hear from you. Drop them some email at bereanspirits@gmail.com. They'd love to hear from you. Until next time, let's keep studying that Bible.